Bir zamanlar televizyon dizisiydi Dallas. Televizyonun siyah beyazlı dönemlerinden bugünlere kadar Amerikan hayat tarzını yaygınlaştırdı bu dizi film. Dallas, Amerika Birleşik Devletleri'nin en büyük 9. şehridir. Yaklaşık 1.200.000'lik bir nüfusa sahip. Bu eyalette yaşayan Kendriana, Müslüman olan kardeşlerimizden bir tanesi. Hristiyanlık dinine çok bağlı olarak büyüyen Kendriana'nın, bakalım nasıl bir Müslüman olma hikayesi var.
My name is Kendriana Washington. I was born in Oklahoma. My mother had me when she was young. She was really active in the church when she was young as well, so Christianity was always a really big part of our lives. I know my father. He helped raise me basically, he was active in raising me for the first 3 years of my life. And when we lived in Oklahoma. And around the time that I was 3 years old, my mother moved to Dallas for better opportunities. And I've been living here since I was around 3 years old, so basically most of my life. I'm 21 now. I was really young. I don't remember much from Oklahoma. I was born in a small town. We lived in Tulsa, but I was born in Okmulgee. I was kind of a surprise all the way around. The population is very low. It's still very low. I think it's decreasing as time goes on. It's definitely a farm town. I've only been there a few times in my life. I went there to visit my great-grandmother. She lived there until she passed. So since then, it hasn't been the main meeting place for my family. But when we moved to Dallas, I went to school here. I've basically always gone to school here. And Christianity was a really big part of our lives. Since my mom was a single parent, she worked really hard and she sought refuge in the church. So we were always there, sometimes multiple times per week. And that's where I met all of my friends at that time. And when I was young, my relationship with Christianity was primarily emotional. I liked to go there. I liked the way it felt. It's where all of my social activities were.
Kendriana Hanım, zamanının çoğunu kilisede geçiriyordu. Annesi çalıştığı için evde tek başına kalmak durumundaydı. Evde tek başına kalarak zaman harcamak yerine, vaktinin çoğunu kilisede, Hristiyanlık dinini öğrenerek ve çeşitli kilise faaliyetlerinde bulunarak kullanıyordu. Ayrıca annesi kilise korosundaydı ve bu onun kiliseyle olan bağlarını daha da kuvvetlendirmişti.
Well, when I was young, my mother was actually, she worked for FedEx. And that's hard work, it's long hours. But when we weren't there, our friends were basically in the church. So we were in the church on Wednesdays, we were there on Sundays, we were there on Tuesdays. If she wasn't working, we were basically there because we had a sort of small Southern Baptist background. So the church was kind of like our family. In the church, when I was young, I went to Sunday school and I attended Sunday services. My mom loved to sing, so she was always in the choir. The church had different activities that we could do throughout the summer and throughout the year. And as I said earlier, it was mainly emotional. There were no theological studies. And I think that as a Christian, it was all about connecting. It was all about feeling God and being with God and having a personal relationship with God in respect to the Trinity.
Annesini koroda söylerken dinlemekten büyük keyif alıyordu. O Protestan mezhebine mensuptu. Protestanlık diğer Hristiyan mezheplerinden bazı ayrımlar gösterir. Katolik ve Ortodokslar gibi ruhani başkanları yoktur. Protestanlık, Katolik ve Ortodoks kiliselerinin merkeziyetçi anlayışının tersine, çeşitli kiliseler veya mezhepler arasındaki kurumsallaşmamış bir topluluktur.
Well, the structure is kind of similar to what happens in the masjid. We meet on Mondays instead of meeting on Fridays. There's praise and worship, which is basically in non-denominational and Protestant churches. And a Protestant Christian, and later I didn't have any denomination. So in some groups of Christianity, there is no singing or music, but there was music. That's sort of how it starts out. And then there's a lecture or a sermon, and after that there's a call to the altar where people can come up and accept Christianity if they like, if they're not Christian, or they can sort of renew their faith. On Wednesdays, there's sort of a midweek service where everyone comes into the church and there's a short lecture and a short worship period, and then we go home. And all other days of the week would be when organizations would meet. So there may be a Bible study with women or a Bible study for children, something like that. And they basically choose a verse from the Bible and everyone's able to study and analyze it. But the huge difference, I believe, in Bible study in the church and Bible study in Islam and at the masjid is that in the masjid, it's basically theological. You know, you study the background, you apply it to your life, you talk about the hadith and what's written in the Quran and what maybe the different opinions are and what we should do in our lives, where Bible study in the church, for me and from my observations, it was mainly praying. We did study the verse and it was mainly about tugging at your heart and getting an understanding from your heart, not necessarily from an objective view. So that's why I think in Christianity, Christians are more, they like to feel, whereas Muslims, they want to understand a little bit more and get the background and think more objectively.
Katolik inanç sisteminin çoğunluğunu korusalar da, Katolik Kilisesi'nin Papa'ya verdiği geniş yorum ve uygulama yetkisini kabul etmiyorlardı. Dini inançları daha kişisel düzeyde yaşama ve Katolik Kilisesi'nin dünyasallaşan ayin ve uygulamalarından uzaklaşma gerekçeleriyle Protestanlar, Katolik Kilisesi'nden ayrılmışlardır.
Actually, I'm not completely sure what groups probably wouldn't have any music. I know that some don't. The structure is different in different church. In Christianity, there's Catholic groups, and then there are Protestant groups. And I was Protestant. I wasn't really raised in the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church is much different than the Protestant Church. In the Protestant church, in most Protestant churches, there is a portion where there's music and there's singing, and that could be it could range from a full multi-piece band to a choir alone. It really just depends on what that particular group is. I started out in a Baptist church, so that's really active. I think especially in African-American churches, predominantly African-American churches, which is what I was raised in when I was a child. Music and singing in the choir is a really big thing, and I think it always has been a big thing for the Black community. Historically, in the beginning, when my ancestors were first brought to this country, they sought refuge in religion. Of course, some of them were Muslim, most of them weren't, and all of them had to adopt Christianity and become Christian. It was sort of forced on them, but it's kind of the way they organized and they came together, because they were working from when sunrise to sunset, and then they would come together and they would have their own churches and they would sing these songs that tell their story. There are these spirituals that talk about how I'm a slave now, but when I die and I go to see Jesus because they're Christian, I'll finally be free. And a lot of these songs are still in churches today. It definitely it shows what they were going through, you know. And something, I think for the Black community, the dynamic really changed during the civil rights era, because this whole time it had been all about the church and being involved in the church. And although things are tough here in America, and although we face discrimination and racism, some very disgusting racism, when we die, we'll finally be free and we'll finally be equal. But during the civil rights era, the Nation of Islam, it started to grow, and you know, leaders like Malcolm X, they were teaching something totally different. They were saying, no, you deserve equality in this world. You deserve equality in this country. If you can't get a job, then you start your own business. You start a Black-owned business. If you can't get an education, then you go to the library and you read books. I mean, Malcolm X he was mostly self-taught, especially later in his life, and he was so knowledgeable. And things started to change in the Black community, and unity was formed, and Islam sort of started to make an internal transformation for people, no matter what walk of life they were from. I mean, during that time, we look at the media and it shows what things were like during the civil rights era for the different groups. In the Black community, it was a time for them to grow and for us to sort of change our place in the country and take back our rights. Whereas you see some of the media in sort of the upper class or white communities, you see it was all about music and dancing and American Bandstand. It was totally different. Whereas in the Black communities, there was something happening. There was this uprising going on. I just think that the differences are sort of great. You know, you see that, people think that this time was, it was such a great time for music and fashion. No, there was something going on in the Black communities. There was something great happening.
İslamiyet'in kendilerini kucakladığını gören ve ırk ayrımı da yapmadığını anlayan zenciler, hızla Müslümanlığı benimsiyorlardı Afrika'da. Ancak daha sonra köle olarak kullanılan bu zenciler, hem ailelerinden, hem topraklarından, hem de dinlerinden koparılıyordu. Köle bütünüyle başka bir insanın malı olarak düşünülen, herhangi bir eşya gibi alınıp satılabilen kişiye verilen isimdir. Ne yazık ki kölelik, eski çağlardan 19. yüzyıla kadar süren uzun bir tarih boyunca çeşitli biçimlerde var olmuştur. Köleler, taşınır herhangi bir mal gibi görüldükleri ve onlara hiçbir hak ve özgürlük tanınmadığı için, kendilerinden istenen her türlü işi yapmakla yükümlüydüler. Bir köle için kölelikten kurtulmanın tek yolu, efendisi tarafından özgürlüğünün geri verilmesi, yani azat edilmesiydi.
In terms of my family, a lot of slaves were brought from the western coast of Africa, and they were brought here in these ships, and they had to endure these grueling conditions. There was no food, there was barely any food, there was barely any water, and it was entire families. It was entire families put into these cramped these cramped spaces. Actually, if you can go online or to different museums and you see how small these spaces were. You couldn't lift up your arms, you couldn't move your legs, everyone was chained together by their feet. There were diseases. If someone got sick and it seemed like they wouldn't be able to be used in the slave trade, then they were thrown overboard. Children, wives, husbands, they were separated and they were killed. And I'm here today because someone survived that. And it's difficult for me to believe and understand. And I think that I take a lot of the things that I have today for granted. But someone went through that for me to be here today. And slaves were, a lot of the slaves were brought, actually, there was slavery in America, but actually most of the slaves that were brought from West Africa ended up in South America or in the coasts. So a lot of them, that's why you see a lot of Africans or people of African descent in Haiti. You see a lot of people of African descent in Cuba. All of these different islands and these places in South America, because the sugarcane was a really big crop. The closer you get to the equator, more sugarcane was like a really big crop. Whereas in North America and the modern day United States, the crops were tobacco and cotton. And slave traders would bring the people and they would make them all stand up. They would beat them into submission, and they would grease them down, and they would make them all stand in a line and to be sold as cattle. And they would have auctions, and they would sell them off to landowners and people who owned businesses, and they would have them work in fields. And I don't think people realize, sometimes I think people fail to realize how difficult that could have been. It's sort of, they think of it in a perspective where, oh, it happened a long time ago, and oh, it was bad, but there are people around the world who suffered more. And I mean, that's true, and that could be true, but it wasn't a cakewalk. It wasn't like an easy thing. Women who were pregnant, they had their children alone, and the next day they had to go out and work again. They weren't given a chance to rest. I mean, think of how much pain they were in. A lot of people died from malnutrition. A lot of people were forced to work until the skin was taken from their bodies and their bones were weak. And families were separated, and that actually contributes to the dynamic of the African American community today. You see a lot of single mothers. You see a lot of families that are separated. They're not together. Well, it started during that time. I mean, imagine the people, imagine the tribes and the families that were torn apart in Africa and then brought here and torn apart again. It was a strategic measure, actually, by slave owners. It was a strategic measure to separate them so that they can lose their strength. When you don't have your family with you, you feel hopeless. So they couldn't organize, they couldn't free themselves if they were around people who spoke different languages than them. Women couldn't raise strong sons if there was no father in the household. So it created a weakness in the foundation of Black families in America.
Çocukluk yıllarından itibaren okumayı, araştırmayı, incelemeyi çok sever Kendriana Hanım. Oldukça meraklıdır. Bu merakı onu Hristiyanlık dinini de sorgulamaya yöneltir. Sık sık kiliseye giderek rahibe kafasına takılan konuları sorar ama aradığı sorulara mantıklı yanıtlar alamaz. Bu sorgulama onu zamanla farklı inançları araştırmaya yöneltir. Allah'ın varlığına ve birliğine bütün kalbiyle inanmaktadır ve onun insanları uyabilecekleri kuralları göndermeden bırakmayacağını düşünür. Artık tek yapması gereken Allah'ın insanların hayatlarını gerçek düzene sokmak için emrettiği ilahi yasalara ulaşmaktır.
Well, I think that my transformation to becoming Muslim began when I was a teenager. I was very active in the church. I believe that I was a pretty strong Christian. I studied. I was pretty inquisitive. I had a lot of questions. I actually got on a lot of the clergy members' nerves. I annoyed them because every Sunday I was like, I read about this, and can you tell me more about this? And he couldn't answer a lot of my questions. As I got older, I actually had a mentor, and her name was Yvonne, and her husband's name is Jose, and they taught me a lot spiritually. We used to have these conversations about spirituality and what it means to be Christian, and I became closer to God in that way, and I always thank them for that. I was in church and I felt like I began to experience something different. I grew spiritually. I experienced this exponential growth in my spirituality, and I felt closer to God than I had ever felt before. But I would pray and I would go to the altar and I would worship God as a Christian, and I started to feel like there was a cap. Like I wanted to get closer to God. I felt like something was wrong. I wanted to get closer to God. I wanted to be closer to God. I wanted to learn more about Christianity. And I started to do something that I'd never done before. I would pray and I would prostrate to God, and instead of worshiping God through Jesus, instead of using an intercessor, I would worship God directly. And I had no idea that this is what people do in Islam, but I started to do it on my own and it changed my life. And I did this up until I began to go to college, and I sort of had this newfound freedom, and I wanted to let go of some of the difficulties that I had in my past in the home, and I wanted to become a better Christian, but I also wanted to figure out who I was. And my first roommates in college, I had two roommates. One of my roommates was Hebrew, she was Jewish, very devout. She practiced the Sabbath every weekend. She read the Torah. She knows some Hebrew, and we used to have these in-depth discussions about religion. And then I had another roommate who was Catholic, and alhamdulillah, she actually is Muslim now. She said Shahada last year on Eid. But we would sit together and we'd have all of these discussions, and she would tell me, you know, if you feel like you can't get closer to God, it's probably because you're worshiping Jesus. And I'd think about it and I'd be like, oh, well, you don't know anything. You know, I've always done it this way. It's not going to change. And she would tell me about how Judaism and even Islam, she would talk to me about Islam, and she would tell me, you know, Muslims and Jews, we have these guidelines of how we live life. You know, our religions, they have laws and rules to solve all of the problems in life. And this is something that I was looking for.
Yüce Allah kullarına hakkı, hakikati göstermek için lütfuyla gönderdiği vahiyleri ve peygamberleri hidayetine vesile kılmıştır. Allah Resulü sallallahu aleyhi ve sellem de 23 yıllık risaleti boyunca hidayete vesile olmak için olağanüstü bir gayret göstermiştir.
When I was Christian, it's something that I was looking for. I wanted a direction. I felt like I would go in church on Sunday and I'd ask for forgiveness and I'd worship God, and then throughout the week, you know, it sort of wore off and I'd make the same mistakes and then I asked for forgiveness again and I would make those mistakes again. And I wanted to know, how can I mean, there's got to be a rule book somewhere. There's got to be something that can tell me how to live my life. There's got to be something that I can do. And she actually introduced me to her friend, Maya. And Maya is Egyptian, she's Muslim, and she started to tell me about Islam, while my Jewish roommate was telling me about Judaism. And I was more attracted to Islam because I felt like it didn't have any serious national ties. There was no sort of nationalistic agenda. I felt like Islam is something that everyone can be a part of, no matter what race you are, no matter your background or what religion you came from or what sex you are or the color of your skin. And I was very attracted to that. And she would tell me these things that I was absolutely fascinated about. She would tell me about how Islam, how Muslims made all of these innovations in science. And she would tell me about how Muslims prostrate on the floor to be closer to God and how Muslims worship God directly. And I was like, I've been doing that this whole time. This is something that I can be a part of. So I learned more and more about Islam, and I actually came to the mosque here because I feel like this mosque has been very influential in my development as a Muslim. I feel like I learned so much here, and I feel like I've definitely been accepted by a lot of people here, and I've grown as a Muslim through some of the programs that are here. And I actually came here. This is the first mosque that I had ever been to, and I met with the imam here, and I asked a lot of questions, and there were some things that I didn't understand because I wasn't Muslim, and I felt like I was going to be a little arrogant and challenge all of these things and find out the true story. But alhamdulillah, I became Muslim. I said Shahada. I didn't say Shahada in the mosque. I was a little intimidated and afraid. I was like, people are going to be hugging me, and I just don't know how I feel about that, saying it on a grand scale, because then everyone will know. So I said it at my university. I had a witness and I said it there, and I felt I didn't feel this huge change internally. I just felt like, okay, now it's time to get to work. I have a lot that I need to do. I have a lot that I need to learn. So I went home and I read Quran, and that's when, after I said Shahada, I began to face a lot of challenges that I think a lot of converts go through. I started to lose sight of who I was, because I had to figure out, how can I take my identity and how can I combine it with Islam? Like, can I be my old self and still be Muslim? How am I going to tell my family? What will they think about it? I did tell my family, and overall they were accepting. I don't think they're too happy about it, but you know, they just say, okay, well, this is the thing that you want to do. My biological father, I told him, and he was okay with it. He was like, oh, that's a great idea. My grandfather actually is a preacher. He's a preacher. He's been a part of the clergy for maybe nearly 40 years, and he's actually the head pastor at a church in Oklahoma. And he was accepting. I mean, he has Muslim friends. He's completely okay with it, and he actually used it as an opportunity to tell me about how Islam has been beneficial to the Black community in America.